He told everyone in the boardroom that I was completely replaceable. He smiled as he fired me, thinking he had just secured a $5 million deal all for himself. What he didn't know, and what his overpriced lawyers failed to check, was that he didn't own the product he was about to sell. I did. My name is Elena, and I spent 3 years building a predictive analytics software from the ground up. I was the lead developer at a mid-sized tech firm run by a CEO named Richard. Richard was the kind of guy who wore custom Italian suits, but didn't know how to open a PDF without calling IT. He was a salesman, plain and simple. And to his credit, he was good at selling my work. I still remember the first time he presented my software to a room full of investors. He stood at the head of the table, pointing at charts and dashboards I had built over hundreds of sleepless nights, using words he had clearly just learned that morning. The investors were impressed. They asked technical questions. Richard smiled and said, "I'll have my team follow up on the details." His team was me. It was always just me. When I first joined the company, it was a struggling startup. I agreed to take a lower base salary in exchange for a 20% equity stake if my software ever led to a major acquisition or a massive enterprise deal. I also made sure my employment contract had a very specific, somewhat unusual intellectual property clause. Before I officially signed on, I had already filed the core patent for the algorithm under my own private LLC. My contract stated that the company was granted an exclusive license to use my patent, but only for the duration of my active employment. For 3 years, I worked 80-hour weeks. I built the software, patched the bugs, and managed the servers. Richard just played golf and took clients to expensive dinners. Finally, the big break came. A major investment firm wanted to buy an exclusive enterprise license for our software for $5 million. It was the deal of a lifetime. It would have meant a $1 million payout for me based on my equity agreement. 2 days before the final contracts were supposed to be signed, Richard called me into his glass-walled office. Human Resources was already sitting there. "Elena," he started, using that fake, sympathetic tone. "We're restructuring. The software is finished, and frankly, we need a different kind of leadership moving forward. We're letting you go, effective immediately." I stared at him. "You're firing me 2 days before the buyout? You know that voids my equity clause." He smirked, leaning back in his leather chair. "Read your contract, Elena. Equity requires active employment at the time of closing. You're no longer active. We appreciate your hard work, but you're a developer. You're replaceable. Security will escort you out." He thought he was a genius. He thought he had just saved the company $1 million and kept the entire $5 million pie for himself and his board. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just nodded, packed my desk, and went home. Then I made a single phone call to my lawyer. That night, I sat in my apartment with every contract, every patent filing, and every email I had saved over 3 years spread across my kitchen table. I had been careful, methodical, not because I expected betrayal, but because a mentor once told me something I never forgot. The most expensive mistake in business is assuming people will do the right thing. So I had done the right thing for myself. Quietly. Years before it would ever matter. The next morning, Richard walked into the boardroom with the investors, ready to sign the $5 million contract and pop the champagne. The lead investor, a very sharp woman named Caroline, stopped him before he could uncap his pen. "Richard," she said, looking at a document her legal team had just handed her, "we have a massive problem with the due diligence. It appears your company doesn't actually own the underlying patent for the algorithm." Richard laughed nervously. "Of course we do. It was developed in-house by one of our coders." Caroline shook her head. "No. The patent is owned by an LLC registered to Elena Vance. Your company only had a licensing agreement contingent on her employment. Since you terminated her yesterday, your license has been revoked. You are trying to sell us a $5 million empty shell." Richard turned pale. He excused himself, rushed to his office, and called me. He called 27 times. I didn't answer. By noon, the investors pulled out of the deal entirely. But Caroline, the lead investor, didn't give up on the software. She had her team track down the actual owner of the patent. We met for coffee the next day. I showed her my LLC, my clean patent ownership, and the fully functional software. Without Richard's bloated company acting as a middleman, I offered her an even better deal. She invested $3 million directly into my new startup for a 30% stake. I was now the CEO. Meanwhile, Richard's company went into a tailspin. Without my software, they had nothing to sell. Without the $5 million injection, they couldn't pay their debts. They had hired expensive new executives in anticipation of the buyout, and now they couldn't make payroll. Within 8 months, they filed for bankruptcy. All their assets were put up for auction. I attended the auction. I walked through those rooms slowly. The same conference tables where Richard had presented my work as his own vision. The same whiteboards still covered in diagrams I had drawn. A lot number was taped to everything, turning years of human effort into dollar amounts, most of them embarrassingly low. I bought their servers, their office furniture, and their domain name for pennies on the dollar. I even bought Richard's custom leather chair. When I walked into his former office to oversee the move, Richard was there, packing up his personal items into a cardboard box. He looked 10 years older. The custom Italian suit was gone, replaced by a wrinkled shirt. He looked at me, his eyes full of bitterness. "You destroyed my company." I sat down in his leather chair and smiled. "No, Richard. I just took back what was mine. You told me I was replaceable. It turns out, you were the one who was completely unnecessary. There is a lesson here that no business school will ever teach you. It is not about revenge. It is about ownership. The most powerful position in any professional relationship is knowing exactly what you own, what you have built, and what cannot be taken from you without your consent." Richard thought talent was interchangeable. What he never understood is that talent without documentation is just labor. Talent with a patent, a contract, and a plan is leverage. My real power was never the software. It was the decision I made 3 years earlier, alone, before anyone was watching, to protect myself. That is the difference between an employee and a founder. That is the difference between being replaceable and being irreplaceable. If you've ever had a boss try to take credit for your hard work or steal what rightfully belongs to you, this story is for you. Never underestimate your own value, and always, always read the fine print. Hit that subscribe button and join the Financial Karma family. Let me know in the comments, what would you have done to Richard? And remember, the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting everything.